The drawings of Miss Book reveal an episode of the most horrific suffering in the life of a country that is known for its capacity to endure suffering. Danzig Baldaev was born in 1925 and he grew up in an orphanage for children of political prisoners. He was eventually drafted into the Red Army in 1943. Following the war, Danzig was dragooned into working as a warden for the rest of his career. Having a talent for art, Baldaev documented an encyclopedia of Russian criminal tattoos and their meanings during his time in the Gulag system. Unbeknownst to everyone, he also made a collection of drawings depicting atrocities that took place in the Gulag that were so horrible some people don't believe they are even real. But I believe they're real.
Hi. Thank you for clicking on the video and welcome to my solitary confinement cell somewhere on the Gulag archipelago. I don't know where. I appreciate you visiting me. And while you're here, I might as well tell you about this picture book I've been reading to kind of pass the time inside of here. I say picture book, it's not exactly coffee table material. The drawings in here are gruesome depictions of life behind the Iron Curtain in 20th century communist Russia. A lot of, not exactly your idea of like wholesome fun, but it is really crazy, man. It is really interesting, and while the drawings are really old, the book is not old. This book was just published in 2010. I think the Baldaev estate came out with it, a few years after he died. So I'm not sure when he penned the drawings, but the book has only been out for really a few years. And the book and the video that I'm making here, by no means any kind of history lesson. I don't even think the book it doesn't exactly do a chronological order. Instead, the vignettes are kind of like spread into different stages of life inside of the Gulag, and some of the things that he saw, punishments and things like that. So let me go ahead and get started here. We'll jump right into it, and kind of just thumb through a few pages here. Let me take a look and pull up my little table. Okay, let's get started here. There's actually a small amount of history up front here. Warning, history alert. I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of just here for the weird artwork, but obviously with something like this you have to start out with a little history, and just to set the scene for the book here, there's a brief mention at the beginning of the Soviet Empire following the revolution, and during the 1920s we have a depiction of religious leaders that were sought out and arrested and murdered. They were given the choice to deny their religious loyalties in exchange for their lives. Of course, many of them were put to death, and they chose death as an example. I think the caption here mentions having a quota for building communism. And the idea was the government did not want any gods before them. There are no gods before the government, no gods before communism, that kind of thing. The birth of the Gulag and the Red Terror, September 5th, 1918.
Hundreds of thousands of churches, temples, and synagogues were destroyed. Millions of believers were killed for their beliefs. And to get started here, you can't have a slave state without slaves. We kind of begin with arrest and interrogation here. And in this vignette, the officer is saying to his subordinate here that they were told to arrest 12 prisoners and they could only find 10. He's saying in quotes here, just take any 2 people from the apartments on the first floor. Informants for the slave state kept the population in fear, not unlike the Inquisition, really. The NKVD never verified their reports, rather, they encouraged the most blatant lies. And propaganda encouraged children to inform on their parents, fooling them into orphaning themselves. The humane interrogation was starving somebody for days and then getting them to confess in exchange for a hot meal. Also considered another humane form of interrogation was simply standing in the corner without sleep, food, or water. Of course, in many parts of the Gulag, they would just beat the shit out of you to make you sign the piece of paper. A more grueling form of interrogation was being hung by your arms behind your back, known as the rack. This was medieval Russian torture, really. And of course, nobody was safe. Here is a depiction of an officer being whipped bloody for suspicion of some kind of collusion. If you were lucky enough to actually get a trial, they had means of beating you and interrogating you so it wouldn't show in court. And here's an interrogation that they did for certain types of people that I can't talk about on YouTube. And something Baldaev refers to as the settling tanks. I'm kind of not going to get into this either. It's a bunch of people crammed into the room. So, like, some of them died in there. It's gross.
Oof, man. Yeah, the bit about the settling tanks kind of got to me. Just the thought of being crammed in with like 30 other people. And some people died where they stood, which is kind of fucking crazy. Yeah, pretty brutal. And I'm leaving a lot of this out. This next bit that we're going to get into right here is kind of about life and death in the Gulag. And I'm going to try to breeze through it as quick as I can. Obviously, I'm trying to keep a lot of this out for YouTube, especially like the women and children type of depictions. And there are plenty in this book to go around. But let's take a look here at life and death.
Okay, you've been interrogated, you've been beaten, and you're ready for slave labor. The first thing they're going to do, hose you down in freezing weather to get that stank off you. And also to, kind of pacify you. Just get you ready for absolute hell. You're going to be a proud member of a political slave labor team to gather wood or something. Okay, I'm not going to lie. These 2 drawings, I was going to leave them out of the video. I only put them in here because while I was going over the book, it reminded me of this old movie that I saw like forever ago about this Russian political dissident that was like made to tap dance. That was made to do tap dancing for the Soviet Union, like the USSR or something.
Wait, what do you mean? We're landing in Russia.
Welcome home, Nikolai.
Listen, man, I'm not your servant and I'm not your babysitter.
Which brings up an interesting point. What exactly are you?
It's a very generous offer, and I...
Go check it out. It's called, the movie is called White Nights, 1985. Sick as fuck. Here's a depiction of political dissidents who were left to die that were sick as fuck. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to lighten the mood because, this whole part coming up here is just about how the Soviet got rid of their dead. And, buddy, they killed millions and millions of people. And they were chucking dead bodies over into the ocean. They were throwing bodies into abandoned mine shafts. There's said to be hidden makeshift tombs of bodies all over the Gulag archipelago. And apparently they would take dynamite and blow holes in the permafrost to make mass graves. Russia is home to the beautiful frozen hell that is Siberia. So, blowing holes in the permafrost and covering dead bodies in ice, and then also dumping them into lakes that were constantly frozen over, or rivers leading to the Arctic Ocean, is something that they did. And apparently they had to take a special pickaxe tool and pierce the skulls of the dead bodies by order of Joseph Stalin. Baldaev is very particular about notating this. Oof, double dead. Yeah, that is kind of insane when you have the government giving out that kind of an order. And they're talking about people who were dead since maybe like all winter. They were waiting for spring. Let's keep moving on, though. I'm going to get into what is next here. And I think maybe the most horrifying thing about this book is kind of getting thrown to the wolves. As a political prisoner, you're kind of at the bottom of the hierarchy of criminals inside of the Gulag. This whole part of the book kind of goes over how the criminal class could torture and murder and kind of have their way with political prisoners. In fact, sometimes guards would even secretly order them to do so. And that is exactly what is happening here. This is a drawing of criminals drowning a political prisoner in a barrel of sewage by an unofficial order given by Gulag officers. And here we have a depiction of a political prisoner that was dumped in cement and is very clearly not having a good time. According to the caption, apparently this kind of thing happened a lot. I don't know if he means in cement particularly, or just making things look like an accident. I'm not sure. And the network of criminals had particular punishments for particular offenses. As some of these brutal drawings will show, the caption here reads, "To pull a Turk, impaling the enemy of the people on a spike for resisting torture." The sentence is carried out by order of legitimate thieves and with the silent approval of the authorities inside of the prison camp. To plug the throat. Punishment of an enemy of the people for disrespect towards the prison authorities or the second shadow power in the camp, the legitimate authoritative thieves. And when the caption here mentions the second shadow power, I believe it's talking about there were apparently 3 classes of criminals. There was the highest order, which was kind of like a mafia type of thing. And then there were actual thieves and criminals that were legitimately arrested. And then at the bottom, you just had the political prisoner. And all of these punishments are apparently for different offenses. They're pretty gruesome. We have someone being cut in half, someone being buried in the snow. Here is what they call the Bard of the Gulag, and apparently this is the most common thing that they would do, which is a red-hot poker in your ass. And the caption here reads, "In Stalin's Gulag system, privileged criminals murdered other inmates with the collusion of the administration. They electrocuted, stabbed, hanged, and decapitated them, inserted red-hot crowbars into the anus, etc. Many criminals had 10 or more sheep, i.e. murdered prisoners, including enemies of the people, on their conscience. Thieves carrying out a death sentence because somebody had ham they did not want to give up. Splitting open the skull of an enemy of the people in revenge for his refusal to let the criminals appropriate his daily work quota.
Yeah, I'm not sure why you would want to appropriate somebody's work quota. I'm thinking what they're meaning is either like taking credit for the work quota and getting the ration for it. Because as we're going to get into up here, you needed to work in the slave labor camp to eat in the slave labor camp. And if you didn't fulfill your quota, well, you didn't eat. Kind of going to get into that here.
Starvation is kind of the bread and butter of the Gulag system. It was used as leverage, torture, punishment, and from what I can tell, basically, you're going to starve at some point. The downward spiral was something like you lost your daily ration for not meeting your labor quota, and then you were too weak to make your labor quota, and eventually you ate garbage. To demoralize and humiliate an intellectual enemy of the people, he was chained and given a copy of the Pravda newspaper. He was also forced to defecate in the same bowl he used to eat gruel out of. The caption reads, "Punishing a convict for assaulting a guard by handcuffing him yoke backwards. A prisoner yoked backwards could only bear it for 15 or 20 minutes. Following such a punishment, he would never repeat the assault in the prison camp again." Punishment of a particular prison shown here is criminals being forced to sit on narrow beams for hours or days. If they fell, they were beaten or put in a noose before being perched again. The convict was taken outside and forced to draw water with a bucket from one hole in the ice and pour it into another hole 15 to 20 meters away from the first. Another type of punishment for disobedience was called voting in the sun or drying the palms, and this was holding your arms in the air until they got tired, and if you were to lower them, they would shoot you. And here we have guards bringing back a killed escapee to display inside the prison. And on the topic of escapings, prisoners couldn't store food inside the Gulag, so criminals in remote northern camps would coax other inmates to escape with them, and then eventually kill them, somewhere in the taiga for food. And this was apparently a common practice in the Gulag camps that were more geared at being extermination kind of death camps. And this is the administration ordering prisoners to just randomly dive in the snow or the mud, and the slowest to do so would be shot. And then lastly, in the punishment part of the book are this is a picture that he is captioned the stairs of death, or the year-long stairs, because it's 365 steps. Apparently, I had to look it up to see if it was real. It's some remote area where there was a gulag, and I guess it was real. This is the staircase right here that they used to throw people down. I'm assuming maybe this is rebuilt or something. I don't know, because this would be like 100 years old at this point.
Yeah, I had to look that up and make sure that that was indeed real. And it is real. It's a tiny little remote area. I think there's a little chapel on top of where the stairs are there, but sure enough, it's fucking real. They do a little tour there where they tell people about the staircase and everything. Pretty brutal stuff. Coming up here is kind of the, well, this is the end of the road, end of the book, end of the story here, and it really goes into kind of just all the horrible shit you've heard about communist Russia. The chapter of the book is called "The Country Becomes a Gulag."
Here's where it all breaks down. Again, the book isn't really in any kind of chronological order, but obviously this is kind of depicting like the Holodomor or purges or something. The country itself became a gulag at some point. Nation states were robbed of livestock and grain, and open-air mass executions became common to target areas where there could be aspirations of national identity to rise up against the government. And during their battle in World War II, they would send Gulag prisoners to the front lines to fight Germany. And when they came back victorious, they were thrown back into the gulags anyways, even after being promised their freedom for fighting on the front line. The excuse was that if they were really loyal to the communist cause, they would have died in battle. This drawing with a train is different. These are prisoners of war that they would keep on the train until they died. I guess so they could say that they weren't killed under direct custody, maybe. Here is an island where people were left to die, or I guess maybe this represents multiple islands. Apparently they buried 250,000 people around this region. And it's notated here that by order of Lavrentiy Beria, any political prisoner could be used for the testing of chemical weapons. The caption below this illustration mentions several thousand people were murdered and buried in Soviet Belarus. And to wrap it up, we have a depiction that is made to illustrate the lethal conveyor belt that the Gulag was. These are the weak and elderly prisoners being laid down naked in the snow to die in front of other inmates who were having a hard time fulfilling their quota. But eventually Stalin died and millions of Gulag prisoners celebrated.
Yeah, and that is pretty much it. Now, like I said, I mean, granted, by no means any kind of like history lesson about communist Russia or something. And even for the book itself, that was maybe like half of the book, maybe a little over half about that. If you want, there are plenty of other books by Baldaev if you like this kind of scratchy pen art. I'm going to put that link in the description below. And I do appreciate you coming out. I think somebody's coming. Hold on. Oh, shit.